there, dog people. Today I want to tackle an issue I see come up a lot in comments and threads, asking the question, do shelters lie about dogs? You know what I'm talking about when a shelter describes a dog as easygoing or great with other dogs, but then you bring them home and it feels like you've adopted a totally different animal. But here's the thing, in most cases, shelters are not intentionally lying to you, even though it can feel that way sometimes. What's really happening is way more complex, and understanding it can completely change the way you approach dog adoption. Okay, let's dive in. Shelter stress and the 3-3-3 rule. So some people meet this amazing dog at the shelter, they totally fall in love, and then they bring home the dog and find that the dog is acting totally different than how it was described and how the dog acted when they were in the shelter. Maybe the shelter said this dog is really low-key and easygoing, but now in your home he's barking at everything that walks by and it's driving you crazy. Or maybe a shelter described a dog as getting along great with other dogs, but when you bring the dog home, it's growling at your resident dog. So what gives? The first reason why this might be happening is due to the dog's decompression period when they get out of the shelter. And to understand this, we need to talk about something called the 3-3-3 rule. You may have heard of this before. This is crucial for anyone adopting a shelter dog to understand. And it refers to some general guidance and timelines about what you should be expecting when you bring home a new dog. So let me break it down for you. In the first 3 days, the dog is completely overwhelmed and super stressed out. This needs to be their time to just relax and decompress. In the first 3 weeks is when the dog will start to learn your home routines and some of the rules around the household. And it's really only after 3 months that most dogs are going to feel completely at home in your house and really fully settled. And a lot of times it's only then that you'll get to see the dog's true personality really shine. Now, it's really important to think about what a shelter is like from a dog's perspective. There are strange dogs barking constantly and unfamiliar people walking by all the time. There are weird smells everywhere, and I just can't emphasize enough how incredibly stressful this is for the dog, and with no understanding of why they're there or if they'll ever get to leave. Many dogs in the shelter are completely shut down. They're really not even themselves. They're just in survival mode. They've left the only home they know and they've been thrust into this crazy, chaotic environment. So what happens when you adopt this stressed out, shut down dog? Well, they come into your home, which is great, of course, but it's another really huge environment change. New smells, new people, new rules, new everything. It's another massive adjustment, and your dog really needs time and patience while they reorient themselves. Most dogs need anywhere from a week to a couple of months to fully decompress and really feel at home and start to let their personality show. So you shouldn't be making any assumptions about your dog's long-term behavior in these first few days, because they're going to be so stressed out and really won't be themselves. A dog may normally be calm and relaxed in a home environment that they've become accustomed to, but initially this new environment might be so stressful for them that they may become more agitated and anxious than usual, leading them to bark more at whatever's going on outside. It's really normal to see a dog's behavior be a bit different than expected in a new home, because environment changes in general are pretty hard for dogs.
Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying this video, please make sure to like the video and subscribe to our channel. It's a huge help and will allow us to keep making more videos like this one.
In most situations, after that decompression period, whatever it is for that individual dog, you're going to see a much happier, calmer dog. But in other situations, you might wind up with the opposite of that. When I first adopted my dog Remy, he was an absolute angel. He never barked, was super chill, and just slept all the time. I thought, wow, I got so lucky with this chill, easygoing dog. But you know what? That wasn't the real Remy. That was totally stressed out, completely shut down, decompressing Remy. Knowing now how sensitive he is, it breaks my heart to think about how completely overwhelmed and stressed he must have been in the shelter. Poor guy. After about 3 months, right on schedule with that 3-3-3 rule, as he finally felt comfortable enough to be himself, his true personality emerged. And guess what? That included reactivity, stranger danger, nuisance barking, nipping and biting at me for attention. It was honestly pretty horrible for a while. But I knew this wasn't the shelter's fault. They honestly didn't have a lot of information on Remy and were just going off of the very few things they could tell about him when he was in the shelter, which really wasn't a reflection of who he really is. So yeah, sometimes it goes the other way too. A dog who might seem perfect at first could just be masking their true personality because they're in that that shutdown mode. But I would say most cases, the dog becomes a lot calmer and happier over time. That's really the general trend for shelter dogs. The other problem is that people inadvertently make things really hard for their new dog those first few days and weeks coming out of the shelter and moving into the home. It's not intentional, of course, but people just expect way too much from their dogs way too quickly. In fact, we even have a free course starting off on the right paw that will walk you through all the things you need to know when you bring home a new dog and how to set them up for success. Like I said, this course is 100% free. I made this specifically because I was tired of seeing dogs brought back to the shelter and returned due to issues that seemed very avoidable had some different steps been taken when first bringing that dog home and adapting them to a new home environment. So please, if you're thinking about adopting or recently adopted a new shelter dog, watch the course. I think you're going to find it hugely helpful. So if a dog is acting differently in your home than what they were described to behave like in the shelter, it's probably not because the shelter is lying to you. It's probably because the dog is going through their decompression period. Another issue that crops up a lot is that a lot of dogs brought into the shelter, especially strays, just have very little information or documentation about them. So shelters don't really have a lot of information to work with. They may be able to put some of these dogs in playgroup tests and see how the dogs interact with each other in that environment, but as I already explained, shelters are already such a high stress environment that it's really hard to get a sense of a dog's true personality and disposition in the shelter. So they may not be engaging in shelter playgroups the same way they would once they've adapted to a home. Shelters will make the best assumptions and guesses that they can on the dog's behavior based on how the dog is acting in the shelter and what they've seen personally. But at the end of the day, it's hard to know how a dog is going to settle in or behave in your home until they're actually in your home. Again, no intentional misleading is happening in this case. And this is why actually I really recommend adopting dogs from a foster environment, because dogs in a foster environment are in a home, they've gotten a chance to decompress from the shelter, so you'll get a better sense of what their real personality is like. And depending on the foster's environment, you'll get a sense of how well they might do in your environment. The foster can tell you how the dog has been doing with other dogs or other people in the home, and it really is hugely helpful and a huge leg up when you're trying to find that dog that is really a perfect fit for your home. So definitely think about dogs in foster homes. The thing is, it is harder and a little more work to meet these dogs because when you go to the shelter, you can meet a whole bunch of dogs at once. But with the foster, you have to arrange an appointment and go to their home, which admittedly can be a little more stressful and more work for some people, but you're really going to get a much better idea of the dog's personality. Now, I need to be totally honest with you. In some shelters, definitely not all, there's a little bit of what one might call strategic marketing happening. Instead of saying a dog doesn't get along with other dogs, they might say, this dog prefers to be the only pet in your life, or this dog does best in single pet households. A dog who pulls hard on the leash might become a dog who needs help learning how to stay calm on walk. Now, these aren't lies, of course. It's some sugarcoating. But if you're not familiar with shelter lingo, you might miss some of these clues. They're going to help indicate where a dog is struggling. I've personally never seen a shelter flat out lie about a dog's disposition. It's just not in their best interest. Dogs bouncing between different homes is really stressful for everyone, especially the dog. Nobody wants that. Shelter workers genuinely want these dogs to find their forever home that will be a good fit for them. Now, the other thing I've seen some shelters do, and instruct volunteers to do, is to withhold some of the information about a dog's less desirable qualities until closer to the end of the adoption process. Again, information is never withheld, but staff may be trained to not jump to a dog's more negative qualities when you first meet them. I've been told quite plainly in some shelter volunteer organizations that the goal is really to market the dog, and the hope is that by the time someone is ready to adopt the animal, they'll have fallen in love with this pet enough to overlook some of those less desirable qualities. I know that sounds manipulative, and from an adopter's perspective, I totally understand why it would feel that way. And I do really understand if the idea of that upsets people. But the goal isn't to trick you into taking an unsafe or really challenging dog into your home. The goal is to help people be less attached to their idea of a dream dog, to make room in their hearts to engage with the real, wonderful, but ultimately imperfect dogs that make up the vast majority of the pet dog population, whether we're talking about shelter dogs or dogs from breeders. Because let's be real, we all go into adopting a dog with a wish list. Many of us want a dog that can go to parks, cafes, and breweries. We want a dog who loves everyone and everything and wants to do nothing more than to just please us. But the truth is, that's unrealistic for most dogs. And some of us might really benefit from a reality check. Most dogs, even those we might normally classify as friendly, are at least dog selective, which means they like some dogs but not others, which really is very much like humans. Other dogs just prefer human company over canine, and still other dogs would really just prefer to hang out with their people and nobody else. Having a dog who is a perfect social butterfly is really, really, really rare. Even when you're raising a puppy from a qualified breeder. But I think a lot of us have been trained to think that dogs are supposed to be these little puddles of affection with everyone and everything they meet. Mostly because those are the kind of dogs we see the most often in public. But that's really not common at all. And I think that some shelter workers really hope that by marketing a dog effectively and putting off sharing some of those less desirable qualities, adopters will be encouraged to really evaluate what actually matters to them in a dog versus what would be nice to have but isn't all that essential. For example, I don't plan on having kids. So it is a big deal if my dog doesn't get along great with small children? Not really. But the first time I went to adopt, if I had seen a dog labeled as not great with kids, I might have made some assumptions and overlooked an otherwise fantastic dog that would have been a really perfect fit for my home and lifestyle. Trust me, I get it. I had really big dreams of what my life was going to look like with Remy when I first adopted him. But my dreams didn't pan out with Remy because he's just not that kind of dog. It was a really, really hard adjustment to make, and I really had to mourn and grieve the loss of the dream dog that I had in my mind and those expectations that I had of what our life was going to look like together. But once I got past that, I was able to really love and appreciate the real, actual dog who Remy is, and really come to love his personality, even when it makes some parts of my life a little bit harder.
And just to be clear, I am not saying that if you adopted a dog who is really challenging and is making your life terrible, that you should just suck it up. When it comes to dogs behaving differently than we expected, there is a huge range there. And what you can or can't handle is going to depend a lot on your situation and the individual dog. So I'm not trying to downplay whatever you're experiencing. I would just encourage you to reflect on what are real, true problems versus what might be less than ideal, but isn't really such a huge issue. So if you've adopted a dog and are feeling like you've been misled or manipulated by a shelter, I can completely understand your frustration.
But I can also sympathize with a shelter worker who has gotten to know these sweet, charming, wonderful dogs who keep getting overlooked for qualities that, really at the end of the day, are pretty manageable or just not that big of a deal. It's absolutely heartbreaking to see a dog you love rot in the shelter for months. To see that light slowly fade from their eyes.
All the while knowing that they'll be 10 times better and be totally different dogs outside of the shelter.
And I think the hope is that if some people can overlook some of these built-in biases, they'll be able to give these dogs a chance and see them for all their good qualities, rather than hyperfixating on the less than ideal stuff. At the end of the day, I think some of these shelters hope that we won't let our unrealistic, perfect, unicorn fluff dream dogs get in the way of connecting with a wonderful, real dog who would love to be a part of our life. If you want to know everything up front before adopting, here's what I recommend. City-run shelters have to disclose all the information they have about a dog. If you ask direct questions, you will get truthful answers. You can also ask to see a dog's complete shelter records printed out for you and read through them yourself on your own time. All notes and documentation any worker or volunteer has ever recorded will be in there. As I said before, it's also really smart to consider dogs that are in foster homes because you'll get a much better idea of their true personality from someone who's lived with them.
And here's the thing, guys.
Sometimes a dog won't be a good fit for your home, and that is okay. I think people sometimes feel a lot of shame when things don't work out and they have to return a dog to the shelter. I've had to do that, and yeah, it really, really sucks. And it's understandable when some of that frustration ends up leaking over and getting directed towards the shelter itself. But the honest truth is, it's really hard to know how a specific dog will behave in your specific home, in your specific dynamic. Sometimes it really can be a kind of trial and error. I know it's so hard bringing back a dog, but it's worth remembering that your dog's perfect home could still be out there. And bringing the dog back increases their chances of finding that good fit that they need. And there's also some other shelter dog out there that's going to be a perfect fit for your home. If you want to feel a little less crummy about bringing a dog back to the shelter, just make sure to provide really good detailed notes about how the dog behaved in your home. Like I said, some shelters have just 0 notes on a dog's personality and disposition. And that documentation can be hugely helpful in learning about the dog, what they need, and making sure that next time they're placed in a more appropriate home. The bottom line is, when a dog acts differently in your home than how they were described at a shelter, it's really because anyone is intentionally deceiving you. Shelter workers and volunteers genuinely care about these animals and want to see them successful in their new home. When they tell you a dog is great and easygoing, they're usually sharing what they genuinely believe, based on their limited interactions with the animal in an unnatural, stressful environment. Remember, shelter staff is doing their best with the information they have. They can only observe dogs in the context of the shelter, which is like trying to judge someone's personality when they're in the middle of the worst day of their life. It's not dishonesty. It's simply the limitations of evaluating any animal in a high-stress environment. When shelters sugarcoat things and use more gentle language, they're not trying to trick you. They're trying to do something we all do in our daily lives, highlighting positives while softening negatives. Think about it. When you're describing a friend who talks a lot, you might call them outgoing or sociable, rather than saying they don't shut up and won't stop talking. It's the same quality, just framed a little more compassionately. With that perspective shift, you can look at this in terms of more of an advocacy issue. These staff members are advocating for animals who can't speak for themselves, trying to help potential adopters see past some of the dog's current struggles to the wonderful companion this dog could be with the right support. So when you encounter this type of marketing language, try to see it as an invitation to look deeper and have more meaningful conversations about the dog's actual needs and behaviors. Those conversations often lead to much better matches between dogs and families in the long run. And if you're struggling with a new dog, reach out to the shelter. Many shelters offer post-adoption support and would much rather help you work through issues than see the dog returned. Adopting a shelter dog isn't always easy, but giving these animals the time, patience, and understanding they deserve, and a chance to adapt, can be one of the most rewarding experiences you'll have. The dog who emerges after that decompression period, that's the real dog that you adopted. And getting to know them, challenges and all, is part of the beautiful journey that is rescuing an animal. So drop a comment below. I would love to hear more about your experience adopting a dog from a shelter. Have you ever felt lied to by a shelter? Did this video make you think about things differently? We want to hear your thoughts. And if you found this video helpful, make sure to like and subscribe for more real talk about dogs. All right, thanks everyone. Have a great day.